No longer. Alimony, palimony. It's all financial. Love's an illusion.
It's the only illusion that counts, my friend.
Says who?
Anyone who's ever been in love.
Love sucks.
Every day I dive into another untold story from the Golden Age. Those dazzling moments that shaped an era the world still can't forget. If you want to help keep these memories alive, don't forget to hit subscribe. It costs nothing, but means everything. Thank you for being part of this journey. Now, let's get into it. Back in 1985, a single magazine article changed everything for one young star. It branded Andrew McCarthy with the now infamous Brat Pack label, and he's admitted it nearly destroyed his career. He was Hollywood's dream guy of the 80s, the charming romantic lead, the safe crush every teen adored in hits like Pretty in Pink. But off-screen, things weren't picture perfect. Andrew was battling personal struggles, drinking too much, and feeling completely disconnected from the world around him. Despite his fame, he constantly felt like an imposter, like he was playing a role even in real life. Then, in the early 2000s, he shocked everyone by walking away from the bright lights of Hollywood and doing something totally unexpected, something far from the cameras. And when he eventually returned, it wasn't in the way anyone predicted. So what really happened to Andrew McCarthy? Let's rewind to where it all began. Andrew Thomas McCarthy was born on November 29, 1962, in the quiet town of Westfield, New Jersey, a place where dreaming big wasn't exactly encouraged. His dad worked in finance, his mom was an artist, and Andrew always felt like something was missing. He's described himself as shy and uncertain, a kid who never quite fit in. Acting became his escape, maybe even his way of finding himself. He enrolled at NYU's Tisch School of the Arts, training under the same teachers who once shaped legends like De Niro and Pacino. But Andrew wasn't about chasing gritty realism. He just wanted to feel something real, to step into another person's life for a while. His first real break came in 1983 in a coming-of-age film alongside Jacqueline Bisset and a young Rob Lowe. It wasn't a box office smash, but Hollywood noticed him. With those piercing blue eyes and that distant, wistful expression, Andrew McCarthy suddenly became every casting director's favorite leading man. That's exactly what happened for Andrew McCarthy in 1985. His big moment finally arrived. He landed a role in Heaven Help Us, a heartfelt drama set in a Catholic school during the 1960s. It wasn't a blockbuster, but it opened all the right doors. Directors admired him, producers adored him. He was dependable, professional, and the camera loved him. But even with all that praise, Andrew couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong. He felt like everyone else had it together while he was just pretending to keep up. That lingering feeling of being an imposter would haunt him for years. But then came 1985, the year that changed everything. Andrew was cast in St. Elmo's Fire, Joel Schumacher's hit ensemble film about a group of college graduates trying to figure out adult life. The cast was packed with young stars: Emilio Estevez, Rob Lowe, Demi Moore, Judd Nelson, Ali Sheedy, and Mare Winningham. Basically, Hollywood's entire next generation in one movie. The film did pretty well, but what followed shook the entire industry. In June 1985, New York Magazine published a feature by David Blum titled Hollywood's Brat Pack. It was supposed to highlight Emilio Estevez, but instead, it turned into a savage takedown of the whole group. The article painted the young actors as spoiled, shallow, and interchangeable, and that's where the label Brat Pack was born. McCarthy later said that reading that article felt like being handed a career death sentence. Overnight, he wasn't just Andrew McCarthy, he was Andrew McCarthy, Brat Pack member. In Hollywood, once a label sticks, it can follow you everywhere. Suddenly, casting directors saw the label before they saw the person. Still, Andrew pushed through. In 1986, he starred opposite Molly Ringwald in Pretty in Pink, playing Blaine McDonough, the wealthy, preppy kid who falls for a girl from the other side of town. McCarthy brought a quiet vulnerability to Blaine, showing layers of guilt and confusion, as if his character knew he could be better but wasn't sure how. The movie became a cultural hit, solidifying McCarthy as the nice guy audiences loved rooting for, the one who actually showed up when it mattered. But here's what really made him stand out from the rest of his peers. While other actors split audiences, some adored by girls, others by guys, Andrew had something universal. Rob Lowe had that flawless golden boy image that made him a teen heartthrob, but some guys couldn't relate to that perfection. McCarthy, on the other hand, felt real. He had this down-to-earth, almost self-aware charm that made him incredibly likable. He wasn't the coolest guy in the room, and that was exactly his power. He didn't try to impress anyone, and that effortless humility drew people in. Women saw him as sweet and genuine, while men saw him as the kind of guy you could grab a beer with or just hang out and talk. In a decade filled with loud personalities, inflated egos, and larger-than-life stars, Andrew McCarthy's quiet, slightly awkward presence made him unforgettable. Then came Less Than Zero in 1987, and everything changed for Andrew McCarthy. Based on Bret Easton Ellis's dark novel, the film offered a haunting look at wealthy Los Angeles teens losing themselves in excess and self-destruction. McCarthy played Clay, a college student returning home to find his best friend, played by Robert Downey Jr., trapped in addiction and dangerous choices. It was the rawest, most stripped-down performance of McCarthy's career, and he later admitted it was also the most honest. At that point, he was quietly struggling with his own drinking, not at Downey's level, but enough to deeply understand the emptiness of the world his character lived in. The critics dismissed the movie as too polished and superficial, but McCarthy knew the truth behind that hollow feeling. What he brought to the screen wasn't just acting. It was real pain turned into performance. Later that same year, he took a total turn with Mannequin, a wild romantic comedy about a department store worker who falls in love with a mannequin that magically comes to life. It was silly, over the top, and totally camp, but audiences loved it. The movie pulled in over $42 million and became a beloved cult classic that fans still talk about today. That was Andrew McCarthy's paradox in the 1980s. He was everywhere, yet somehow nowhere at the same time. His face was on posters, his name was on movie tickets, but deep down, he didn't really know who he was anymore. The fame didn't fill the emptiness, it only made it louder. By the early 90s, the Brat Pack label had taken its toll. McCarthy has been open about how much it hurt his career. Hollywood didn't quite know what to do with him once he aged out of the teenage heartthrob roles. He wasn't the traditional tough guy leading man, and he wasn't quite a quirky character actor either. He'd been typecast as the sensitive young romantic, and when that window closed, so did the opportunities. In 1988, he reunited with Molly Ringwald in Fresh Horses, a darker love story about a college student falling for a troubled girl from rural Kentucky. On paper, it sounded like a hit, the same duo that made Pretty and Pink Magic, but audiences didn't bite. Critics brushed it aside, and the spark that once drew fans in just wasn't there anymore. The message was clear. The era that had made him famous was fading fast. He tried to shake things up with Kansas, playing a drifter caught up in a bank robbery, but it came and went with little attention. He kept working, but the roles got smaller, the budgets tighter. Then came Weekend at Bernie's in 1989, an outrageous comedy about two guys pretending their boss is still alive. Against all odds, it became a box office hit and even spawned a sequel. But McCarthy later admitted he didn't take the role for passion. He took it for the paycheck. Even when the movies found cult status years later, at the time, he felt like his career was losing direction. In 1991, he starred in Year of the Gun, a political thriller set in 1970s Italy, another project that barely made a dent. 2 years later, he had a supporting part in the critically acclaimed Joy Luck Club, but by then, he'd gone from leading man to background player. Getting In 1994 came and went, and Dream Man in 1995 was released straight to video, a sure sign that his Hollywood star had dimmed. Andrew wasn't crashing and burning. He was quietly fading. The phone calls slowed. The auditions stopped. And when the few offers came, they didn't feel right. Or maybe he didn't feel right anymore. The fame that once defined him had vanished, and he was left trying to figure out who he was without the spotlight. McCarthy later described this stretch as a time of deep confusion and loneliness. He had spent his entire 20s being recognized everywhere, people stopping him, praising him, telling him he was special. And then suddenly, it was like none of it ever happened. The silence that followed fame was deafening. For the first time, Andrew McCarthy wasn't sure if he had lost Hollywood or if Hollywood had lost him. Andrew McCarthy once said he felt invisible, not because people didn't recognize him, but because he no longer recognized himself. That lost feeling became impossible to ignore, So he did something unexpected. He started traveling. At first, it was just a quick escape, a way to breathe again, away from the noise of Hollywood. But the more he wandered, the more it became something deeper, a search for meaning. As he explored new places, he began to write about them, not as a movie star chasing attention, but as a man trying to understand what came next in life. And slowly, those journal entries turned into something powerful. Writing became his way to process everything, his fears, his confusion, and the quiet beauty of being alone. By the early 2000s, Andrew McCarthy made a bold move that almost no one in Hollywood dares to make. He walked away from acting and reinvented himself completely. He began publishing travel essays, raw and deeply personal pieces about the world and about himself. These weren't glossy magazine stories filled with luxury and perfection. They were honest reflections on being lost, finding direction, and facing the space between who you are and who you thought you'd be. Editors took notice immediately. His writing stood out for its soulfulness and depth. It wasn't about fame or escape. It was about real connection and the courage to keep moving forward even when you don't know where you're going. By 2010, McCarthy had become the editor-at-large for National Geographic Traveler, a position he still proudly holds. He also began releasing books that offered an even more intimate look into his journey. His 2012 memoir, The Longest Way Home, followed him around the world as he searched for something he couldn't quite define: peace, belonging, maybe even himself. Then, in 2017, he released Just Fly Away, a young adult novel that showed how naturally storytelling came to him when he wasn't performing for anyone but himself. But here's what's fascinating. McCarthy insists that travel writing wasn't a comeback or a side career. For him, it was something real. Acting had always been about pretending to be what someone else wanted, while writing allowed him to be completely himself. Around that same time, he also stepped behind the camera, directing instead of performing. And he found real joy in that too. He began directing episodes for hit TV shows like Gossip Girl, Orange is the New Black, The Blacklist, Grace and Frankie, and Dead to Me. Over the years, he quietly built an incredible resume as a director, working across dozens of shows while keeping that calm, reflective energy that had always made him different. Andrew McCarthy didn't just reinvent his career, he reinvented his life. Andrew McCarthy has said he loves directing because for once, it's not about being seen. It's about creating something that matters. He enjoys shaping a story from behind the camera, working with others, and crafting something meaningful that lasts. Fame no longer drives him. What he values now is purpose. He doesn't crave attention. He just wants to feel like he's contributing something real. His personal life has also been a journey, one filled with both love and distance. In 1999, he married Carol Schneider, a woman he had known since his college days. Together, they had 2 children, Sam and Willow. But by 2005, their marriage had ended. Carol later shared that Andrew struggled to open up emotionally, saying he had a hard time letting people truly know him. It was as if he'd been running from closeness the same way he'd been running from everything else in his life. Then, in 2011, McCarthy found love again with Dolores Rice, an Irish author and activist. They have 1 daughter together, and this time, he says it feels different. Not because life magically changed, but because he finally stopped pretending to be someone he wasn't. He stopped hiding behind an image and started living honestly. In his 2021 memoir, Brat, an 80s story, Andrew opened up about his long, quiet struggle with alcohol. He wasn't the type of Hollywood name caught in scandals or headlines. No car wrecks, no public meltdowns. Instead, it was something quieter and heavier. He drank every day for years, not for fun, but to dull the ache inside, the constant feeling that he just wasn't enough. He explained that fame in your 20s can twist your sense of who you are. Everyone around you tells you you're special, yet you don't feel that way inside. You're told you have it all, the success, the admiration, but deep down, you feel hollow. You start to believe the problem is you, that everyone else seems to have life figured out while you're still pretending to know what you're doing. That's the reality Andrew McCarthy faced. The same boy who once played the dream guy on screen was quietly trying to wake up from his own illusion. Andrew McCarthy eventually reached the point where he couldn't keep running anymore. After years of numbing himself with quiet routines and that ever-present glass in his hand, he hit a wall. Not a dramatic collapse, but a slow, steady realization that something had to change. He later said it wasn't one shocking moment that woke him up, but a long string of mornings where he looked in the mirror and saw someone he didn't fully recognize anymore. That's when he decided to stop drinking. Completely. He began to rebuild from the inside out. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't glamorous, but it was real. He described the early days of sobriety as learning how to feel everything again. The emotions he'd pushed away for years started flooding back. Fear, regret, sadness, but also joy and clarity. For the first time since his early acting days, he was fully present, and that changed how he saw everything: his family, his work, and his purpose. Writing became more than a creative outlet. It became therapy. Each essay, each journey, each word was a step toward understanding himself. And while the old Hollywood world moved on without him, McCarthy didn't mind. He wasn't chasing premieres or red carpets anymore. Instead, he was chasing authenticity. He began talking more openly about mental health, addiction, and the quiet struggle of losing your identity after fame fades. Fans who had grown up watching him in the 80s found themselves connecting with him again, not as a movie idol, but as a human being who had survived fame and found peace. In interviews, McCarthy often says that what saved him wasn't luck or another big role. It was humility. Learning to accept that he didn't need to be special to be whole. That realization completely reshaped his life. Instead of clinging to the past, he started mentoring young actors and sharing advice about how to stay grounded in an industry built on illusion. He encouraged them to find a sense of self outside of fame, something he wished someone had told him when he was just starting out. And the beauty of it all? His story didn't end with a grand Hollywood comeback. It evolved into something quieter, but far more meaningful. Today, Andrew McCarthy is celebrated not just for his acting or directing, but for his honesty, for showing that it's okay to step back, to fall apart a little, and to rebuild on your own terms. He's proof that life doesn't stop when the cameras do. Sometimes, that's when it truly begins. Andrew McCarthy went from being the face of a generation to finding peace in his own skin, no longer chasing applause, but chasing truth. And in doing that, he became something even more rare in Hollywood: real, grounded, and finally free. For Andrew McCarthy, alcohol didn't come with chaos or flashing lights. It came quietly. It made everything easier for a while: the pressure, the fear, the endless noise in his head. It numbed that constant sense of not being enough. But eventually, the quiet became too heavy to carry. And when he finally stopped drinking, it wasn't because of some dramatic collapse or public scandal. It was much simpler, much sadder, and much more human. He just woke up one day and realized he didn't want to live like that anymore. There was no rock-bottom moment, no intervention, no cameras waiting to capture his downfall, just a slow, steady awakening, a choice to start feeling again. He said the hardest part wasn't quitting the drinking itself. It was sitting still long enough to face everything he had been running from. Sobriety forced him to look inward, and what he found wasn't pretty, but it was real. He began therapy, learned how to sit with discomfort, and slowly rebuilt his life from a place of honesty. McCarthy once said that getting older has been a blessing because it finally gave him permission to stop caring about what other people think. After decades of being defined by other people's expectations, he no longer needed anyone's approval. The man who once felt invisible because he didn't know who he really was had finally learned how to see himself clearly. And maybe that's the real story here. Not that he escaped fame, but that he learned how to stop letting fame control him. For most of his life, McCarthy was haunted by the Brat Pack label, that catchy, dismissive nickname that made him a star and then nearly ruined him. For years, he refused to talk about it. No nostalgia interviews, no reunion tours, nothing. He wanted to move on, to live outside the shadow of his 20-something self. But in 2021, something changed. That year, he released Brat, an 80s story, a raw and brutally honest memoir where he finally confronted the years he'd spent avoiding. The book wasn't glossy or sentimental. It was real, filled with reflection and accountability. He didn't paint himself as a victim or a hero. He wrote about insecurity, about pressure, about the strange emptiness of being adored by millions and still feeling completely alone. Fans and critics alike called it one of the most sincere celebrity memoirs in years. But for McCarthy, it wasn't about publicity. It was about closure. Still, that wasn't the end of it. Because 3 years later, in 2024, he went even deeper. This time behind the camera. He directed Brats, a Hulu documentary that reunited the surviving Brat Pack members, Demi Moore, Emilio Estevez, Ali Sheedy, Rob Lowe, and finally put them all in the same room again. For the first time, they talked openly about that wild, complicated era that made them famous and scarred them all at once. There was no fake nostalgia, no overly polished flashbacks, just truth. They laughed, they reflected, they admitted what they didn't understand back then. The documentary wasn't about reliving the past. It was about making peace with it. McCarthy didn't use the film to attack Hollywood, but he didn't romanticize it either. He described the entertainment industry of the 80s as intoxicating and isolating in equal measure. You were constantly told you were special, but only if you stayed valuable, only if people still wanted you. The moment you lost your shine, the world stopped calling. He said it felt like every relationship in that business came with conditions. You were useful only as long as you could give something. Attention, ratings, relevance, and once you couldn't, you disappeared. Yet, through that loneliness, he learned something priceless. Identity can't come from being wanted. It has to come from within. That's the part of Andrew McCarthy's story that hits the hardest, because after all the fame, the labels, the box office highs and forgotten roles, what saved him wasn't success, it was peace. He built a new kind of life, one that wasn't built on applause. Today, he still works in the industry, but on his terms. He directs because he loves storytelling. He writes because it centers him. He travels because it reminds him the world is much bigger than Hollywood could ever be. He's fully aware that to many people, he'll always be the guy from Pretty in Pink, and he's completely fine with that. He said it's just one chapter in a long, unpredictable book, not the whole story. Getting older, he says, has been the greatest gift of all. It gave him permission to stop performing, not just on screen, but in life. For the first time, he doesn't have to act like someone else. He can just be himself. That's the real happy ending. Not fame, not redemption, not some dramatic comeback. Just the quiet, grounded joy of being comfortable in your own skin. So what really happened to Andrew McCarthy? He didn't fade away. He didn't burn out. He evolved. He refused to play the nostalgia game or pretend the 80s were the best years of his life, because they weren't. He outgrew them. He became something more authentic, more lasting. Now he's a writer, a director, a husband, a father, a man who found contentment outside the spotlight. He's proof that sometimes disappearing isn't failure, it's freedom. He spent his 20s being told he was special, his 30s wondering why he didn't feel that way, and his 40s and 50s building a life that no longer depended on applause. The Brat Pack label may have almost broken him, but it didn't define him. It refined him. Today, Andrew McCarthy stands as living proof that reinvention isn't about escaping your past. It's about making peace with it. He took everything the world threw at him, the fame, the fear, the silence, and turned it into something honest. He traded flashbulbs for reflection, traded attention for authenticity, and finally found what so many people in Hollywood never do, peace of mind. And that's why his story still matters. It's not just a Hollywood tale, it's a human one. Because deep down, everyone's chasing what Andrew finally found. The courage to stop pretending and start living. If you grew up watching Andrew McCarthy or discovered him later through his books, shows, or travels, drop your favorite role or the part of his journey that spoke to you the most in the comments below. Smash that like button if this story moved you. Share it with someone who loves classic Hollywood stories with real heart, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the lives behind the legends. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.